So let's go to the second number. We want to define the biblical, historical, orthodox doctrine of the Trinity. And when one begins to define the doctrine of the Trinity, you immediately run into a problem. The problem is you lack anything in the entire universe to compare to God. When we define the doctrine, it's likely that we begin to try to imagine something that it compares to, because that's how we learn. If you have a child, and you say to the child, this ball is round. This block is square. You're teaching them shapes. How are you teaching them? By way of comparison. This is round, thus this is what round looks like, and round. This is square, this is what square looks like, thus this is square. That's how we learn as people. We compare things in our mind, and that's how, what is a dictionary? It's a word in the dictionary, gives you other words that you compare to it to make understanding. In fact, thesauruses are that. The thesaurus gives us synonyms of words. And oftentimes you can determine the meaning of a word by looking at a thesaurus. Because it'll say that word, and then it'll give other words that mean the same thing. And you say, well, I didn't know what that word meant, but I know what these other words mean, so that word must at least similarly mean the same thing. So that's how we learn. We learn by comparison. The problem is, as I have already said, there is nothing in the whole universe that compares to God. Amen. Certainly many have tried to compare things to God, yet they have often come away in error or even more confused than they were when they began. Give you an example. I've heard people say, well, God is like a pie. One pie and you have 3 parts. Others have said God is like a person. A person can be a father, a son, and a husband. Thus he can be 3 in 1. Yet what we don't realize is the 2 things I've just expressed are an example of tritheism and Sabellianism, both of which were condemned as heresies by the early church. So when we use these, what we might think simple illustrations of the nature of God, what we don't understand is we are very much limiting God to in error. We are going in error about what the Bible actually teaches about the nature of God. Later in this course, we are going to look at some of the historic creeds of the church. We're going to look at some of the confessions of the early church and try to understand what the early fathers believed about this doctrine. Not tonight. That's going to be a few sessions down the pike. But for the introduction today, I want to simply state the doctrine as simply as I know how. I'm going to teach it the same way I teach it to my children. Okay? This is the orthodox, historical, simple doctrine of the Trinity. There is one God. Within the being of God, there are 3 persons: the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. These 3 are equal and eternal. You could put co-equal and co-eternal. There is one God. Being of God, there are 3 persons. These 3 are co-equal and co-eternal. Now that seems like it should be simple enough. Yet we know that this causes many questions in regards to how God can be both 3 and 1 at the same time. And for years, Christians have been accused of being self-contradictory by saying that there are 3 persons and yet only one being. But one thing should be understood from the outset. Though the doctrine stated above has no comparisons that we can look to, it is not contradictory. A contradiction by definition, is a statement that is necessarily false. I'll give you an example. If I say, I won't do it on the board, I just explain it. If I say he is brave, and I say he is not brave, that would be a contradiction. Because I have said he is something, and I have said he is not the same thing. You understand? If I said he is A, and he is not A, that is the law of non-contradiction. You cannot say he is A and he is not A in the same sense at the same time. You understand? That is the law of non-contradiction. It is philosophical and it is true. It's not possible to be and not to be at the same time. That's what was the Shakespeare? He said, to be or not to be, that is the question. And that is the law of non-contradiction. You cannot be and not be at the same time. The doctrine of the Trinity does not contradict itself. It does not say there is one God who is three gods. It does not say there is one being who is three beings. And it does not say there is one person who is three persons. All of those would be a contradiction. The doctrine states that there is one being in whom exists three persons. Now think on that. There is one in this category. There is one essence and three persons. That means there is one in this category and three in a different category. You understand? That is not a contradiction to say that. Though we may not fully grasp it, it is not contradictory to say God is one in essence and three in person. The doctrine states that God is one being in whom exists three persons. So we see the doctrine is not irrational, it is not illogical, but it is incomparable because it is describing the very nature of God in whom resides no equals.